what we're going to talk about today is really, it follows on quite nicely from what Camilla was just saying about the role of ethics. And the thing is that there's a question as what are the ethical rules that should be applied? And then there's a question of, well, how do we make it work? And that's really a pretty big question. Now, our interest in this has come from a slightly different angle in that we're doing a project looking at integrative technology, which is basically technologies that provide ways to link human beings to computer networks and to artificial intelligence. So that's sort of looking decades into the future, but there is technology already developed that does this to a small degree. Various universities, various corporations, Elon Musk's corporation are working on these sorts of things. So we will see greater integration of human beings and computer networks and artificial intelligence in the future. This raises some very interesting, important regulatory issues about surveillance and performance at work, about inequality, about collectivism in work and society. Now, I don't have time to go into all of these. Basically, these technological developments have got the potential to widen inequality, to increase the surveillance and control of workers, to preclude the capacity or certainly reduce it, the capacity for collective action, permanently entrench class inequality. So that's how it comes back to a lot of the issues being discussed at this conference. And so at the core of this is the problem of inequality in power and resources, which has been coming up time and again over the last couple of days. But there are some specific aspects of AI and of integrative technology that mean that just addressing, I don't know why I said just in that, addressing inequality in class and power wouldn't in itself be enough to deal with all the problems that these technologies can potentially arise. So there's a series of reforms, of course, that we need to consider, and some of which we've talked about here at this conference, and some of which are sort of broader social issues like more progressive tax system and more effective redistributional policies in areas like health and education and welfare and so on. And basically policies aimed at more democratic workplaces, better organised labour. And there's also issues about policy for treatment of surveillance, transparency, and so on. What do you do about non-disclosure agreements? The subject of Australian legislation that's just been released this week. But there are also issues about the specifics of artificial intelligence and integrative technology that are relevant here. And what we're talking about today, so although it's come from that background, it really is very germane to AI, to implementing policy with regard to the ethics of AI. So the current focus of legislation, of regulation in this area, well, there hasn't been much, but there is work going on in the European Union. The European Commission has developed a draft regulation on artificial intelligence. It's developed a draft. There's a lot of water to flow under the bridge before this is turned into practice. But it sort of divides AIs into high risk and low risk or unacceptable risk categories, and has different potential responses to each of those. Basically, unacceptable risk, out the door, can't do it. High risk is a whole list of things that are meant to be done about it. Low risk, basically anything goes. That's the 10-second summary of the EU EC regulation. But assuming that something good comes out of this, which I'm fairly optimistic about, there's still the major questions of implementation. How do you keep track of what so many corporations are doing? How do you monitor and regulate so many decisions? How can you anticipate the innovative ways that technology could be abused by so many actors? And how can anyone know enough about so many different aspects of code as to be able to accurately understand it in so many situations? Code is so complex. Can't even do this stuff. Okay, but it's so complex. So we've got two key specific initiatives that we're going to talk about. Well, really one, for time reasons. The two initiatives are about independent digital audit procedures, which we've just called IDAPs, and independent digital ethics committees, which we've called IDEPs. Now, IDAPs, we're not going to talk about after this slide because basically there's a lot of work being done on it by a woman called Deb Raji. She's proposed a series of policy interventions that could make rigorous third-party algorithmic auditor access and protection, make it work. So, and this was last year, a national incident reporting system to prioritise audits of artificial intelligence, an independent audit oversight board to certify auditors, audit standards, and to oversee the audit process, and mandated regulator-facilitated data access for certified third-party auditors. So that is a fairly comprehensive and quite good proposal for having the capacity to audit AI so that people can get in, read the code, understand what's going on, and say, oh, this is good, this is bad. So auditing is an important thing, but on its own, it's not going to be enough. And that's why we say you also need to have these independent digital ethics committees. They'd be complementary of each other. One doesn't function properly without the other. So, what is an IDEC, an independent digital ethics committee? Well, each workplace, each organisation would have one. And it would determine the process within that organisation or within that workplace, depending on how big their organisation is. Determine the process for auditing algorithms within the workplace, resolving any dispute, and operate within a national or, in your case, a multinational framework on the ethical use of AI and algorithms. Well, the EU mechanism basically envisages a series of national oversight bodies anyway. So it itself is a multi-tiered model, and this is then looking at the lower tier, at the organisational tier. So any organisations using algorithms in decision making, they'd be required to set up these ethics committees to oversee them. And in effect, any algorithm that's in place within an organisation would be submittable, perhaps submitted to the local ethics committee. And a failure to establish an ethics committee would be a prima facie indication that an organisation's processes are unfair, but just because you've established one, it wouldn't rule you out of liability for unfair practices. You've engaged in discrimination by applying an ethics committee and so on. So an organisation can't circumvent its obligations, basically, as so much self-regulation does, because the organisation's still liable when things go wrong. So does this make IDEX like the ethics committees in universities? The things that we all hate so much about universities. It's got another ethics committee. Yes, it does. It does make them like ethics committees in universities. In that, if you had a national ethics committee, a national ethics committee for the higher education sector, it's not going to be able to effectively deal with all the research projects that are underway in universities. That's why we have them in each university. So each university can do it. And yes, in that sense, it would be like the ethics committees that we all love so much in universities. So devolving responsibility for implementation to the organisational level. It's the level that's capable of dealing with the issue, because the national level body, it just can't have the capacity to deal with so many projects, to deal with so many activities underway. So, you know, we as researchers, we may hate university ethics committees. They vary hugely. I've just done a project across 14 universities. I had colleagues from other universities, because we were sort of centering around our university. We did the principal ethics process. My colleagues said to me, they had ethics envy on me because of the ease with which my ethics committee dealt with this particular project. And if I look back at what my ethics committee would have been like 10 or 15 years ago, yeah, I don't know how it would have happened. But anyway, so we hate them because they're bureaucratised and they have stifled some of the best advantages. We feel like they're stifling what we do. And indeed, some of the best research projects that have been done, like the Milgram experiment and into authoritarianism, or the Stanford prison experiments, they were projects that basically were deeply flawed ethically. The people who took place in the Milgram experiments were traumatized by them. They were totally traumatized by it. We as researchers got a lot out of it. We benefited greatly from it, but the participants themselves, some of them were screwed by it, psychologically screwed by it. Yeah, they will be an impediment, but still, we still get to do our research. We still do stuff. It's not like they stop all research altogether. It's not like they stop the advancement of knowledge, and nor would these things stop the advancement of technology and of AI in organisations and society. And the university ethics committees, they prevent ethical abuses that otherwise would certainly occur. Let's just see what happened before the rise of the university ethics committees, and we would be seeing those things much worse now. So are they like, would these IDEX be like works councils? Well, yes, in the sense that a works council is established by law and by regulation that has legal rights to information, but works councils are mainly internal bodies. They have on them people who are appointed who come from within the organisation. The digital ethics committees we're talking about here, well, there'd be some internal, but there'd also be external, probably predominantly external representation on them. So they'd have some employees who'd be members, but there'd also be outsiders who don't have direct links to the organisation except through the committee itself. Digital specialists, people on them who understand code, and ethical specialists, or at least non-digital specialists, non-technical, people from unions, ethics centres, community organisations, government agencies, whatever we think would be appropriate. These ethics committees will be accountable to the national body, not to the organisation. By having predominantly outsiders on them, you ensure that people feel they're accountable not to the organisation itself, but to a national body that is in charge of these processes. So if you use AI in recruitment, for example, AI in recruitment has the potential to be very discriminatory. The processes by which AI is able to be used in synthesizing a whole lot of applications for shortlisting people. Basically, through machine learning, you feed in 20,000 applications that have gone for previous jobs, tell the machine, okay, which are the 200 that got it, that got the job. And then on that basis, for the next 200,000, the machine can tell you, can sort them out into, interview these people, don't interview those people. But that process potentially involves replicating the discriminatory practices, the discriminatory perceptions that were held by the people in the previous recruitment committees. So if you don't have a strong ethical foundation built into the AI that is used for recruitment, you can reproduce discrimination, gender discrimination, racial discrimination. So the ethics committee at the local level would be there to make sure that this discrimination didn't occur. And you've got external people on there to make sure it doesn't. And if that HR body doesn't do, if that ethics committee doesn't do its job, the company's still liable if it's found to have been discriminating. I won't go into the other one for times of reason, for reasons of time. So it's not self-regulation. This isn't self-regulation. It's decentralized regulation in the sense that you have to have people at the local level who understand what's going on to be able to have the regulation of such a widespread phenomenon that's occurring in so many different entities and in so many different ways. It's so complex. So we're redirecting risk. AI typically is used to reduce costs and to shift risk from the organisation onto consumers, onto workers. This is a way basically by which firms have to internalise that risk. They have to make a risk assessment and through their representatives on the ethics committee. Okay, what's the criteria by which we have a close look at certain AIs, then other AIs go through the keeper. So you're forcing organisations to internalise risks, to manage that risk directly themselves. So they're not a phenomenon without, they're not a policy without weaknesses. You've got, this is the wrong slide. Okay. The IDEX, you still have a problem with many decentralized systems. So you have to make sure that you've got an overall centralized control, which is why you have this external accountability to it. And it's also why you have these external audits going on as well. So you have these IDAPs, independent digital audit procedures in place in order to complement the IDEX, because without that, you're not going to have a means of making sure that the ethics committees will themselves do their job, because there won't be the threat of auditing. But for the auditors to be able to do their job, there has to be at the local level, the ethics committees in place, because the auditors just can't go everywhere. So, to conclude, AI raises many important issues about work, and these could be heightened manyfold by integrative technology that Georgina and I are looking at. So we need a way of protecting workers in society, way that recognises the decentralised, the highly specialised nature of much decision making, but having a decentralised approach that nonetheless strengthens rather than weakens the power of workers and consumers in the way that many decentralised models do weaken. So, and this model of digital ethics committees and audit procedures, it's consistent with a directed devolution approach. It's talked about in an article in Relations Industrielles late last year. Something that forces decisions at a local level that are consistent with some centrally determined set of standards. And at that point, I'll say thank you very much.